Hi, this is Andrew, and this is Keen On, the daily now.tv chat show with some of the world's leading thinkers and writers. Hello, everybody. It is September the 9th, 2022. And of course, all the world is talking about today is the death of the British Queen, Elizabeth II. Holly Toynbee of The Guardian, no great fan of the royal family, talk about in grieving for the Queen, we also mourn the losses in our own lives. And I wonder whether our obsession, perhaps, with the death of the Queen and the British royal family is bound up in our lack of belonging, our idea that we don't have a belonging in the contemporary world. And the Queen, God bless her, we didn't know her, perhaps she didn't know herself, but she did belong. She belonged to an institution. She belonged to a way of life, a way of commitment, a life of duty and service. One person who's been given a lot of thought to the idea of belonging is my guest today, Kim Samuel, a Canadian academic, social activist. She writes and thinks about the right to belong. For Kim Samuel, she, for the last 2 decades, has been focused on a vision of human connection and rootedness. Kim has a new book out. It's called, appropriately enough, On Belonging, Finding Connection in an Age of Isolation. Kim is joining us, appropriate enough, perhaps, in our age of isolation, from a hotel in New York City. Kim, I don't really want to talk about the death of the Queen herself, but is there any truth, do you think, in this obsession we have collectively with the British royal family and this crisis of belonging that you've spent so much time thinking and writing about?
I've been thinking a lot about this since the death of the Queen yesterday, and seeing such an outpouring from not only the UK and not only the Commonwealth, but really all around. And to your point, one of the articles that you were showing just now, that we can feel a loss too, the losses in our own lives. I thought about the losses in my own life, my father, my sister, my mother, all in the end due to different forms of cancer. But it was the first of those, my father, who had a very serious brain injury in 1997 and was in a coma for 3 months and woke up. And the better he got, paradoxically, the harder it was for him, because of the presence of what I still see in my head as a figure sitting alone at the bottom of a well. He had a lot of disabilities when he awoke, and he awoke very slowly. But I came to see that it wasn't the disabilities, it was the way that people, even well-meaning friends, were treating him because of the disabilities. So I definitely was thinking about the losses in my life yesterday, and also mourning the loss of the Queen. When we talk about the connection, well, belonging to a commonwealth as I do, I feel a sense of belonging, but to a big group of countries. But we also need to consider, and there's been a lot of articles about it too, which you've probably seen, the history of colonialism and reparations and so forth. Right now, what I'm really focusing on, what I know as a really great queen, and she knew her belonging from, I guess, as soon as she was building memories in her life. She knew her belonging because she had a connection with people, with place, with power, with purpose. And to me, those are all the dimensions of belonging. And at the same time, when I look at her life and the life of her eldest child, now King Charles III, I wonder how much isolation they might have felt, and he may have be feeling now, about being designated in such a high place with such high expectations and maybe sometimes feeling cut off. I actually in my book touch on that with regard to, I'm getting used to saying this, King Charles III, in conversation with him, and I've heard this with others around him, that he often looks to see who's at the back of the room, because he thinks that might be the most interesting person when so many people are around him, almost, oh, I don't know, the way a football team would be in a huddle. I say that having never played football in any capacity, but it's that feeling of people pressing in on you and how isolating that might feel, and that maybe he might have more in common with the person at the back of the room being seen for who they are.
Kim, some people might think that the idea of belonging is a kind of luxury that only the wealthy and the privileged, the Charles III's of the world can afford. What's your own history of the idea of belonging?
Well, I was a very shy kid. I always looked down really when people talked to me. I tried to hard to do really well in school, because I thought that if I could do really well in school, then people really wouldn't notice. We all had different experiences in our childhood. I just happened to be extremely sensitive, and it took me until my, oh goodness, probably till my 30s, that maybe I could learn from the way that I'd felt a lot and that no one could see, except that my work is now, and for the past 20 years and counting, focused a lot on groups of people that are isolated all the time. And not only that feeling that I describe as sitting alone at the bottom of a well, but also lack of agency and lack of choice. Example with the I won't say aftermath of COVID, because we're not really past it, probably never will be. But for the crisis of 2020, 2021, people who had a job now don't have a job. It's those that are most vulnerable that are almost always more affected. The voices that are needing to be heard are not mine, even though I wrote a book about it. It's about all the people that I can bring into that book and into my work, who can most illustrate diversity and belonging and a right to belong. I'm very happy to be a what I call a passionate messenger of a powerful message.
It seems to me a bit of a luxury. It's the kind of thing that people like you and I can afford, but most people, when they're concerned about their next meal or their next job, simply don't have the time or the energy or the luxury to think about.
Well, if people are hungry or out of work or experiencing abuse in the home, it's not only about that thing, and that thing is horrible. It's also, to me, lack of belonging. If we can lift this up and make it meaningful, it could be helpful. Recently, a man by the name of Ken Roth, director of the international NGO Human Rights Watch, and I had an opportunity in 2018 to speak to him about this idea of a right to belong. And I said, what do you think? And he said, the first thing is, do not think about this in terms of bringing on a new human right. There's no appetite for that. We've now been parenthetically a decade in at the UN trying to get a declaration on the rights of older people. I don't know how that could be so challenging. He said, look at the right to belong as a way to lift up neglected rights. And I said, well, like which one, for example? And he said, you pick any of them. And that's where the way that I look at this was born. So you're right. People do not have this luxury to think about belonging in the way that you say. To me, it's really fundamental. And if someone's right of belonging, this birthright of belonging, is denied or not upheld, I believe that you're going to see a real uptick in the huge challenges facing us today.
You talk a lot about the right to belong. And in fact, you suggest that I think that that the UN needs to pass an equivalent right to belong alongside its Universal Declaration of Human Rights that, of course, Eleanor Roosevelt was so instrumental in founding. That was a long time ago, when these international institutions and organizations seem to have a little bit more credibility, organizations like the UN. Should we still place faith in those kinds of institutions? I mean, I know you think that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights has had an effect. Perhaps it has, but there's still around the world an enormous disrespect for human rights. It doesn't seem as if the UN Declaration has made any difference on that. Just look at Ukraine or Russia or China. We did a show on China yesterday. So what difference would it make, for example, if the UN did indeed pass a universal declaration of belonging? What difference would it make to the world?
I don't think it would make much difference to the world unless we had an empowerment at the level of communities. I also, though, don't think it's wise
But then we wouldn't need it.
You're right, then we wouldn't need it. Yeah, actually, you began talking about the monarchy, yeah? And that's an example of an institution that, in order to be effective, needs to change a great deal and change with the times. I think that we're seeing with the UN, what's in there. I mean, a lot of things created after World War II left out indigenous peoples, left out a lot of the voices. Where were the voices speaking from the global South more? And when we see the kinds of challenges we have today, we could ask, what is our government doing? Unless we have something to replace it with that is a body that at least brings a lot of people together for discourse, then we shouldn't give it up. So I think it's really a combination, but underlying all of it is who's in the conversation in the first place. My main job is to bring a lot of people together in order to have less of an adversarial or competitive relationship, and to figure out what the answers are, and to kind of hold up that circle that I don't own, that I didn't ever create, but I'm really quite happy to be a messenger. I'm in New York City right now after I was sick with COVID and had pneumonia. I came to New York because it was the quickest place that I could get some physical therapy for my lungs. And I walked and I walked and I walked for about a month, and in addition to getting medical care. And I kept seeing the word belonging everywhere, including on all kinds of houses of worship for all kinds of faiths and traditions. And all those places were closed. And so it would be something about you belong or so on. And I thought, there's an irony that we can't even go in. The word belonging is everywhere. I think it's down to us to decide what it means and how we value it. I tend to think that this is an ancient story. I'm just one of the people holding a candle and wanting to start a peaceful revolution about it every day.
I think you're right, Kim. It is indeed an ancient story, an ancient debate about whether we can combine communities of belonging with our current globalized economic system. We've had a number of debates on this show about whether or not we can confront climate change with our current economic system of capitalism. Do you think that we can belong in the 21st century, Kim, in our current capitalist economic system?
I don't think it's about capitalism or not capitalism. It's how's it being done? What does the business consider its responsibility to its employees, their families, the communities where they do business? I guess if I was asked, am I pro-capitalism or anti-capitalism, I would come down on the pro side, but not because of being part of a business, but because I feel that the private sector is a very important engine, and particularly those businesses that are social businesses, social entrepreneurship. And I think it's always been possible. I think what happens is when we kind of take for granted key values, including loaning your resilience to someone else, about not leaving people in victimhood, about knowing sometimes you're the one that is going to need help. If we ignore that, if we don't think about practices in our workplaces, if we don't think about not only inclusion, but inclusion in a fully participatory way around a table, if we don't not only have the rules that we need in place, but if they're not practiced properly and with compassion, then I'm a lot less hopeful. But I am hopeful. I just know that we need to kind of wake up, if that makes sense. As you've said, this is ancient. I didn't invent the word or the concept. I just think that it comes down to not just talking, but acting more and listening more, and that business as usual, so to speak, doesn't work now.
You've written a lot about this. What else are you reading these days? You mentioned some other books too. What are your other books on your reading table?
Well, this is my first book, and to write this book, I read over 300 books. So I've now gone back to the things that have inspired me the most. One is von Eschenbach's Parsifal, the knight that I really, he's in my book actually as a person, that I write about compassion and about how in any tradition or telling in history, we look at the Grail quest usually as there's sort of the initiation, the call to it, and then there's the slaying dragons and rescuing fair maidens, and then the last part doesn't get as much attention, and that's the part where all you have to do, seemingly not much, only few of the knights achieve this, is to show compassion for the dying king. Sire, what ails thee? And I do think about, I've been going back to that very recently because my book's about to come out, and I'm going to my sources of inspiration. It's what you just said about really listening. Another is really anything by Wendell Berry. Identifies himself first as a farmer and then as a poet, and his essay "What Are People For," which I think is a read that really everyone should have, and it brings it down so basically that if we see each other with a lens of, oh, you're there, I just met you, but what do? You're there, then we're really missing out why we're here. Those are a couple. And then William Blake, the first poet that I ever read as a young reader, were the Songs of Innocence, Songs of Experience. And I've often said that those poems saved my childhood, to understand that wherever you have good, there's bad, that we're full of opposites, and that's really okay. It helps to understand that things are in the whole, so that we don't go off and, in inverted commas, try to save the world. We just try to do our part to make things a little better.
Yeah, I think it's all about maybe not belonging, but talking about belonging. And that's what Kim Samuel's doing in her new book on belonging, finding connection in an age of isolation. She's addressing the elephant in the room, perhaps the biggest question of all in the 21st century. So congratulations, Kim, on being so brave and approaching such a big subject.
Thank you. Thank you very much.